The Bible says my king is the king of the Jews. He's the king of Israel. He's the king of righteousness. He's the king of the ages. He's the king of heaven. He's the king of glory. He's the king of kings. And he's the Lord of lords. That's my king. No means of measure can define his limitless love. He's enduringly strong. He's entirely sincere. He's eternally steadfast. He's immortally graceful. He's imperially powerful. He's impartially merciful. That's my king.
I shouldn't have watched that. Give me a minute. Oh, whew. I've seen that thing probably a dozen times and it still gets me. Sorry. My name is Joel. Yes, I'm really this emotional about this. This stuff will change your life. I am living proof that this stuff changes your life, and it is really, really real. I'm Joel. I'm the lead pastor. Glad you're here today. For those of you who are our guests, thank you for being with us. Your presence is an honor for us, and we hope that you have felt that from us. For those of you joining us online, we want to say a big welcome to you as well. Thank you for allowing us to be part of your journey wherever you are today, whether you're in the hospital and you're watching us from there, whether you're at home, or whether you're listening to this on the road. Hopefully you're not watching on the road. But we're just happy that we get to be a part of your journey wherever you find yourself today. But whether you're online or whether you're here in the house, I want to begin 2020 with a very important distinction, and that is the distinction between wishes and goals. You know, most New Year's resolutions fail because they are wishes. We wish something to happen. A wish is something that we want to see happen that has a positive outlook on our lives, but we don't really have a good game plan how to make that happen. Now, if you were tracking with us last month through our Battle for Christmas devotional book, you read pretty much my introduction today on December 31st. That was by a design that we would read that on December 31st, and then the first Sunday of the year, we would talk more about that. So a lot of us set resolutions as wishes. We wish something to happen, which is why roughly mid-February they all stop. Because you just don't have the energy to keep that wish going long enough. But a goal is something very different. A goal, the way I define it, is SMART. Not smart here, but SMART, the acrostic, S-M-A-R-T. And everybody has a different version of this. This is the one I use, which means just the version our staff uses. But a goal is SMART. In other words, it's first specific. It's very specific. If you say, I'm going to lose weight this year, you'll never do it. That's not specific. It's got to be, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. Okay, that's specific. Measurable, because if you can't measure it, it's not real. So it's got to be something concrete, something that can actually, you can tell if you're getting towards the goalpost. You know, that's why you call it a goal, because you're moving towards the score and the win. It's got to be measurable. It's got to be aligned with the vision and mission of who you are. You go, Joel, I don't really think of myself as having a vision for who I am. Well, if you're a child of God, if you're a Christian, you do have one. You have what He has created you to be. So what our goals need to be is aligned with that, and aligned with what God has created us to be. Also, they need to be realistic. That's the R. I mean, you know, you may say, hey, I want to run in the Boston Marathon this year. Well, I might have that as a goal, but it's not realistic this year. It's not going to happen. I've missed the qualifiers. I can't run that far. Forget fast. I can't go that far. That's not realistic for me. Not this year. I mean, a few years maybe. But the T is time constrained. That's my favorite. A mentor of mine says, a goal without a deadline is a wish. So you say, I want to do this by the end of the year. No, that's not time constrained. Most of us can't conceptualize a year at a time. We really can't. We might have a year-long goal, but we can't really think 1 year at a time. We're just not wired that way. Most of us can barely think 1 day at a time. Okay, so that goal has got to be broken down. There are goals that I have, for me personally, they're big annual goals, but I break them down into quarters, and then I even break them down into months And when it comes to things like the number of books I want to read, I actually have to break that down by the day because I have to read so much every day. That's time constrained when you put the time on it and now limit yourself. That's a goal. There's a big difference in that and a wish, just something you want to see happen. But here's the really neat thing. God has goals too. And they're really smart. I mean, when God sets a goal, it is specific, it's measurable, it's aligned with who he is, it's realistic because he's the king of the universe and can do whatever he wants. And it's certainly time constrained because even though he himself exists outside of time, he works within our time. Now, the trick is, though, the problem really is, we think God has wishes and resolutions when he has goals. When God verbalizes these goals, we call them prophecy. It's when he says something ahead of time and says, hey, in this amount of time, this is going to happen. And when he says that goal and he verbalizes it and he gives that prophecy, we have two choices. We either impose on God and say, well, I'm just assuming you're going to have a resolution the way I do, which means you might work it out, you might not. Or we take him at his word. And if we take him at his word and we believe that God has goals and we believe that his prophecy is simply his verbalizing of his goals, that changes everything. That changes how we view Jesus. That changes how we view the Bible. That changes how we view God. That is the foundation for this entire message series, Here Comes the King. And it actually is in two parts. Part one is the first 3 months of this year. Part two is the first 3 months of next year. So I know I just said most can't conceptualize a year at a time. You're looking at someone that can. I'm weird. I can actually conceptualize roughly 16 months at a time. It is the strangest thing. I don't recommend it because you don't know what day it is. People will ask me my age, and I'm like, I don't know. Because in my mind, I'm already the next year older. Anyway, all that said. So this year, we're diving into this, and we are skipping a few verses right at the front of Matthew because in December of 2020, we're going to go back and hit those verses we missed now. Yeah, I know I'm weird, but just bear with me, I am. But what we're going to see today is that God's goals have changed everything in all of creation. And so we have an opportunity to step into a new year seeing God very differently, seeing our King, Jesus, very differently when we realize how much his goals have changed us. We are in the book of Matthew, of course, as we are for the whole series. Matthew chapter 1, verses 17 through 25. And again, we're hitting the first 16 verses later in the year. But starting at 17, you get the kind of the summary of the first 16. And then we go on to a story that might be a little familiar to some of you since we just got through with Christmas. But here's Matthew chapter 1, verses 17 through 25, jumping right into the middle of it. It says, Thus there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. This is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph. But before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law, and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him, and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. The nearness of Christmas helps us remember the miraculous nature of the prophecies. So in Matthew's time, all these 14s were much more significant than they may be to us today. But right there in verse 17, you have this, there's 14 from this and 14 from that. And in Matthew's day, 14 had a very significant spiritual significance for them. It mattered a lot to them. And so what they had interpreted the prophecies to mean is that there would be 14 generations from Aaron, the first high priest, to the high priest at the time of the building of the temple, which there were, and then 14 from there to the last high priest mentioned in the Old Testament, which was around the exile. And then they believed there'd be another 14 and that would be the arrival of the Messiah. Matthew is saying, newsflash, dear Jewish people, Jesus was that 14th generation. Jesus was the fulfillment of all those prophecies. Now, most of us here today, and my bet is most of you watching online, probably are not Jewish. So that probably doesn't seem as significant to you. But let me point out something really amazing about Jesus. Jesus fulfilled 400 prophecies in the Old Testament regarding the Messiah. By the way, that would be all of them. Sometimes people count 410, some of them come up with 390 something. I'll round it off, 400, all of them. Jesus fulfilled all of them. And lest we think that's an easy task, I mean, remember the Old Testament was written some thousands of years in some cases before Jesus came along. This wasn't rewritten after he got here. This was written ahead of time. This was God's goals. We call it prophecy when it's given, when he speaks it, but all this was given, and then Jesus comes along, and we think, okay, 400, that's not such a big deal. With given enough time, surely someone can fulfill 400. All right, well, let's work this out. Let's just take 8. 8 of the 400. Pick any 8 in your head you might want to pick. The fact that he was a man, the fact that he was a Jew, the fact that any 8 you want. Pick 8. The odds of one person fulfilling even 8 of those prophecies would be 1 in 100 trillion. That's a TR, trillion. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't conceptualize trillions. So here's the way to think about this. My home state is the state of Texas. And if you know a Texan, you know that we're very proud of the size of our state. It's huge. Matter of fact, when Alaska was let into the country, let's just say Texas never got over it. Okay. We really like being the biggest state. And we still call the fact that we're the biggest one in the continental 48. Okay, so we still claim that one. Okay. That's a big place. But if you took my home state and you filled it with 100 trillion silver dollars, the pile across the state of Texas would be 2 feet deep. Mark one of those 100 trillion silver dollars, 2 feet deep, drop it somewhere in my home state, then take yourself, blindfold you, drop you somewhere in the middle of the state and tell you to find the one marked coin blindfolded. That's 1 in 100 trillion. That's just 8 prophecies. Jesus fulfilled 400. So when I say only God could have done this, only God could have done this. This was impossible from any other person. No one else could have worked this out. But there remained a problem, though, getting from the Old Testament into the New Testament, and that was the problem of King David. Specifically, the Messiah had to be the heir of King David. He had to be a son of King David. The problem with Jesus was that he didn't have an earthly dad. So in the time of Jesus, though, you had to have an earthly father to establish lineage. And we know from our Christmas series, Jesus was biologically the heir of King David because of Mary, his earthly mom. But we got a legal problem. That's a big problem. How is God going to solve that? Enter Joseph. Joseph is now the solution to this. Joseph is an amazing guy to me in the New Testament, and yet he's barely mentioned outside the birth story. I mean, that's it. You have him at the birth, you have him when Jesus is a little bit older, and then he's never heard from again. But in this moment when we do see him, we see a guy that's pretty incredible. You see, the adoption of Jesus by Joseph made Jesus the legal heir to King David. Let me explain. You got to understand how marriages worked back then. We talked about this a little bit with Mary. If you were here when we talked about Mary, I'm just going to remind it to you. If you weren't here when we talked about Mary, let me teach you how it worked. We would call it engagement. They would have been engaged. But in the Jewish world, that engagement was a little bit stronger than that. It was like marriage without benefits, if you know what I'm saying, wink, wink. Okay? Joseph would have gone to Mary's dad and said, I'd like your daughter's hand in marriage. Her dad obviously said yes. Married Joseph in front of her dad. They would have exchanged vows. The father would have said, you are now husband and wife in every way except that which leads to children. And then Joseph would have gone off to prepare a home for he and Mary. Mary would have stayed in her dad's home. In that in-between time, she comes up pregnant, and Joseph's got a problem. The Bible says Joseph was a righteous man. He was a man who obeyed the law, which meant he was not a hypocrite. He didn't just kind of go through the religious motions. This was a man who knew God, and God knew him, and he was obviously a compassionate man. You say, why was he compassionate? He wanted to divorce Mary. Stop thinking like a 21st century Westerner. First century Jewish world, he and his betrothed were pure and faithful to the law, she comes up pregnant. Guess what happened? In his mind, he goes, she had an affair. She cheated. She stepped out on me. She betrayed me. And under the law, he had every single right to go up publicly in front of their governing body and say, this woman had an affair, she's pregnant, and I am divorcing her on the grounds of adultery. And she could have been killed for it. But Joseph loved her. And in spite of all the pain he must have felt, having his heart frappéd, broken, because she had apparently had this affair, everything he knew said she had cheated, instead of doing that, he simply says, I'm going to divorce her quietly. In other words, I'm going to do the most merciful thing I can. I'm simply going to go to her father, and I'm going to break off the marriage. And I'm just going to walk away. Why would he do that? Because he loved Mary so much. And Joseph was so graceful, and he was so merciful. He did the best thing for her. Without an accusation, she would not have been killed. Without him making the accusation, she might have been ostracized, but she would have been alive. He goes to bed that night. The angel appears to him and says, no. This is actually God's son. What she told you is the truth. But I think, man, no wonder God the Father chose Joseph to be Jesus' earthly dad. I mean, dads, you look at what Joseph did, man, we got to step up. I mean, come on. I mean, this guy loved Mary so much, and then he gets this dream, and he still has to decide to do this thing. And then by going forward with the marriage to Mary, he's also adopting Jesus as his son, making Jesus the legal firstborn child of Joseph. And it wasn't even his kid. But he was willing to pass along his lineage to Jesus, making Jesus the son of David, fulfilling one of the most critical prophecies in the Old Testament. But like Mary, Joseph had a choice to make, so Joseph has to surrender to the unexpected will of God. I mean, this would have been, think about it, Joseph would not have wanted it this way. I mean, come on, let's be really honest. We want to gloss over some of these Bible stories and go, it ended well. Well, while they were going through it, it was pretty cruddy. I mean, think about it. For the rest of Joseph's life, there would have been somebody looking at him sideways going, there goes Mary's fool. Huh, child of God. She just stepped out. Joseph had to live with that. As a man, he had to deal with that the whole time, and only he and Mary and this baby and a few random shepherds knew the difference. As far as everyone else was concerned, she had stepped out on him, and he was a sucker to marry her. But he did it. He had to surrender to the unexpected will of God. And in doing that, in surrendering to the will of God, fulfilling all those prophecies, his part in all those prophecies, we arrive at the birth of Jesus. Not where the story ended, but where the story just kind of hit the middle chapters. You see, I can't overstate it enough here at the very beginning of this series. The arrival of Jesus validates the Lord's ability to keep his word. I mean, we have thousands of examples, but this is a really big one. This is a stamp so big, it changed the way the world keeps time. We changed our calendars based on the life of Jesus. That whole BC and AD, or as the scientific community tends to use, BCE or CE and, I can't even remember, BCE and CE. It's still the same thing. The life of Jesus split the way we calendared. His life changed everything. And that one huge example validates the Lord's ability to keep his word, that he's going to finish what he starts, that when God sets a goal, take it to the bank. You can die on that goal. He's going to see it through. He's the one being in all of creation that can actually make it happen. We may want to make things happen, but there's always things that come against us, and we can't always change that. God can do whatever he wants. And the arrival of Jesus validates his ability to keep his word. A word that we first have whispered way back at the beginning of the Bible. I mean, we're 3 chapters in, and Adam and Eve have already messed everything up. And before we criticize them too much, we would have done the same thing. But Genesis chapter 3, humanity had just fallen. It's the darkest spot in humanity. I mean, everything is broken. Everything's ruined. God has to come down there and clean up the mess, and he's casting down his judgment on all 3 involved, on Adam and Eve, and then the serpent that Satan had used as this puppet. And he's telling the serpent, and he gives Satan the first whisper of this goal that he was going to bring Jesus to earth. Genesis 3:15, look at it. God says this to Satan. He says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. When Jesus died on the cross, Satan thought he'd won. He killed the Son of God. I mean, Satan had to be pretty happy with himself. But 3 days later, Jesus came back to life. So in the fullness of time, we just realized that all Satan had really done was just strike at Jesus' heel, but Jesus crushed his head. He defeated that enemy once and for all. When I tell you the arrival of Jesus validates the Lord's ability to keep his word, I am not exaggerating. It is the biggest stamp on the history of humanity that proves God will finish what he started. R.A. Torrey, the early 20th century writer and pastor and evangelist, wrote this, just remarking on our faith. He said, faith is not belief without evidence. It is belief on the very best of evidence, and that is the word of him who cannot lie. He goes on, and he says to ask for any, he says to ask, it is the belief on the very best of evidence, the word of him who cannot lie. Faith is so rational that it asks no other evidence than this all-sufficient evidence. To ask other evidence than the word of him who cannot lie is not rationalism, but consummate irrationalism. In other words, to ask God to show you another sign than his own word is insane. That's what he's saying. Because if God has said he's going to do something, he cannot lie. So he has to do it. And the arrival of Jesus validates the Lord's ability to keep his word. So this year we can truly resolve to act in faith. That we can really act out of not just some irrational idea, but we can act out of the reality that God will keep his word. He will do what he said he would do. You know, the religious people of Jesus' day, you're going to see this through this series. You're going to see the people who should have known the most. And they should have recognized Jesus the instant he was born, they should have known. But they missed it. Sometimes Jesus is standing toe to toe with them, and they missed it. Why? Because their expectations for how God was going to work were too different. It was so narrow how they were convinced God was going to do things that they missed Jesus right in front of their eyes. And you're going to find yourself asking through the book of Matthew, you're going to go, how could they have missed it? How could they have missed it? And it all comes back to right here. Their expectations were wrong. Their expectations were so narrow that they couldn't see God working. Is it possible that whatever is going on in your life, you're missing God's actions because your expectations are just too narrow? That you're just convinced God's not going to work that way, so you don't see it. And so then you get mad because unmet expectations are a very difficult thing to chew on. I know. I've been there. You know, most of my adult life, I was told that God had big things for me, big plans for me, and that he dreamed big dreams. I had mentors who came along in my life that I respected tremendously. And they said, you know, Joel, God has wired you for something big. Just submit to him, stay humble. God has wired you for something big. I didn't know what that meant. Okay. I had a mentor tell me, man, Joel, just tell God yes when he calls you to do something. Okay. I'm going, how am I going to figure this out? I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no clue. So I said, okay, I'm going to go back and finish my seminary education. So I did that, and then I finished that, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to get a doctorate, because I just kept saying yes, you know. And then God had this crazy plan. And he asked us to go and plant this church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I didn't really want to do it, but I'd gotten all this advice to always tell God yes, and I asked all these mentors, I said, you know, I think I'm crazy, and I'd lay it out. And they'd pray about it, and they came back and said, you know, we agree. We think that that's the Lord's next step for you. Awesome. We sell the house. We just, you know, it's like the Beverly Hillbillies in reverse. I mean, we sell everything, and we move back, you know, to the south, as it were. I didn't really want to leave California. I liked California. And we're down there, and I had these big expectations, big plans for how things are going to work. And I fell flat on my face. I did everything that I knew was what I should be doing to build a church. I did everything I was trained to do. I did everything my mentors told me to do, and nothing worked. And I watched that dream just crumble in between my fingers. And I had to bury the very church that I moved down there to start. And I remember yelling at one of my mentors in one of these conversations, and I'm like, you were one of the guys that said God was telling me to do this. You actually heard that guy a few months ago, Paul Borden. He was standing right here speaking. He was that guy, and he said, Joel, God gives us experience in one of two ways. Years and mileage. Joel, God has chosen to give you experience through mileage. He has allowed a situation to kick your teeth in to give you experience. And I said, well, Paul, I don't see it. And he said, because you're not looking in the right place yet. You see, my expectations were one thing. And I was so busy seeing what that expectation had to be, that God was just going to do this kid with the Midas touch. It was just going to turn out as gold, and this was how it was going to be. And the whole time God's way over here going, son, I'm doing something else in your life. I want you to dream my dreams. I'm going to teach you a little differently than what you would have asked for. You see, but I almost missed it. I'm not exaggerating. I almost missed it because I just couldn't see God working in a way that didn't match my expectations. So I ask you again, is it possible that you're missing God's activity right now in your life because He's just not working the way you expect Him to? You know, we had December to kind of mesmerize us a little bit. A month of magic to kind of forget about what January brings. But here it is. Everything you've been pushing off in your head, it's here, and don't push it off anymore. Look at it and ask yourself, what is God going to do in this? What if He's going to teach you something by experience, by mileage, instead of by years? What if the very thing that is challenging you right now is the very thing God is going to use to give you whatever that dream is? But what if He's got to take you through fire to get you there? Is it possible that He is working in your life, but your expectation just won't let you see it? You know, one of the things that churches struggle with so much, I mean, every church does this. We struggle with making sure that our expectation for what Jesus wants for us really matches what He wants for us. Weird thing with us humans, we're all self-centered by nature. That's sin in us. That's how we are. It takes Jesus to change that, of course. And so as churches, we can start becoming inwardly focused, and we can start saying, well, I want what I want. I want you to do this because I like it. Now, we don't say it that way because we're way too spiritual to say it that way. But, you know, we say, well, I want it done this way because I like that. This matches my expectation. But the whole time, maybe Jesus is saying, no. I got something back over here, but it's going to be a little painful, and it might cost you something. But I'm dreaming this over here for you, but you got to let go of this expectation. Now, we summarize all of that by saying it's not about us. And I got to hear that as much as anyone else does. It's not about us. That God dreams dreams for us that are so much bigger than we can imagine, but it means we got to let go of those expectations. Because after all, we're made in His image. We don't get to return the favor. You know, we don't get to now make Him us and make Him do what we want. So I want to tell you about some things we're dreaming of, things we've been asking the Lord to show us and asking for Lord, what do you want us to do in 2020? And I've got a really good feeling about 2020. And as we were flying back from Chicago after my graduation, I'm just sitting over there, I'm listening to music, and I'm just catching these glimpses of things, conversations we've had as everything's coming together. And I want to tell you about two things that we're hoping and praying and dreaming for, and that I want you to hope and pray and dream about. And if it's not what God wants us to do, I don't want our expectation to be about us. I want our expectation to be what He wants. So here's these two. Here's one of them. One of them is we have a real dream to take our congregational prayer and our prayer life to the next level. And so what we want to do is we want to have what we're just calling a prayer wall, where we can write down prayer requests and put them on a wall, and then as people come by and pray, they would initial it, and then we can move those to an answer wall to show how God is working in people's lives. Now, We got a few details on that to work out, but we want people to see that we call on God, and then we see that He answers. And that as you put your prayer request in, you go by and you see all these initials of all these people that you may not even know, but they've prayed for your request. We don't have all that worked out yet, but we're getting there. That's something we're dreaming about. Something else we're dreaming about is that would be kind of close. That'd be in a few weeks. We could probably pull that off in a few weeks. But there's something else we're dreaming of for this December. It's the one coming up in 2020. We're dreaming about, we're planning about, we're hoping, we're praying, and we're seeing if this is what God's expectation is for us, and that is to do Christmas for the city in 2020. It'd be a commitment we'd have to do for a few years to do the ice rink that we did years ago, and to do this big light show, and to give that gift to our city, and to give something in the month of December that our community can do that doesn't cost them a thing, but that's fun. And last time we did this, 10,000 people came on this campus. And there were so many conversations that we were able to have with people that would never normally step foot on this campus. They came for an ice rink. But what they found was Jesus with skin on. And maybe you weren't here, about half of you weren't even here when we did that. But you're here because of the decisions this congregation made then to say, okay, Lord, what would you have us do? And we were dreaming big. I wasn't here either when that happened. But we're dreaming and thinking about doing that. I'm asking you to pray for those two things. That prayer wall idea, and then Christmas for the City 2020. See, we want to be the kind of church that God looks at and goes, yeah, well done, well done. Not because we say, God, you got to do it my way, but because we keep saying, Lord, whatever your will is, yes. No matter how scary, no matter how much it doesn't necessarily match our expectation, yes, yes. This is what Joseph had to do. This is how Joseph had to live. Joseph had to say, God, this is not what I expected. This is not how I thought you were going to work. But yes, okay, I will move my expectations to yours. That's what he calls us to do. But we can trust the Lord. We can put our faith in Him. We can rest in Him. Because when God sets a goal, and then He verbalizes that goal as prophecy, you can die on that one. That one's going to happen. And the arrival of Jesus, in the most amazing way, validates, it stamps the proof that the Lord is able to keep His word to humanity, to His church, to you. Father, will you bless us as we step into 2020? May we be the church that moves its expectation to yours. Give us big dreams. We don't even ask for the ability to make them happen. We ask for the faith to trust you to make it happen. In Jesus' name.